Welcome everybody back here at Veil of Sound. And yes, surprise, we have another midweek interview with you or for you. And I'm very, very happy to have another chance of talking to Rylan Gleave from Ash Inspire and many, many other projects, especially his own one, All Men Unto Me. So Rylan, thanks for joining the show once again.
Hi, dude. Thank you so much for having me. A pleasure to be back.
Yeah, it's always good to talk with people that you like, and it's always even better if you get a second chance to do so, right? So, Rylan, you know the deal. Anything that you would like to plug today, which comes to your own projects or friends' projects, it could be a shirt, it could be a record that you would like to plug. We're open for
Oh,
everything.
no, there's loads of great stuff out at the minute. I remembered the shirt thing that you do, so I wore my A Best shirt,
Ooh,
which they're cracking. And Yosha has actually done a lot of the designs for the Requiem album, so great connection there. The new Coven record, I'm not sure if you've heard that yet. That's out, absolutely phenomenal. Some really, really great sounds on that. There's a live album from Moni Jitchell from a Glasgow show last year, which was absolutely class. Obviously, the More the Moth records, the new Penelope Traps record, cracking, new Backwash record. This year has been like fab for loads and loads of different stuff.
in general, right? So if anybody wants to know a little bit more about Maud the Moth and her new record, just go back to our archives. I think it was in February that we talked with Amaya. We also have a review out of a Penelope Trappist album. So you will find lots of the things that Rylan just mentioned. And let's get to your record. And before I start, I think because a lot of people asked me about our first interview and how it was for me, and I said for me it was bloody easy. I was more about wondering, how it was for him. Um, you are now 7 years into testosterone. Um, do you now, after all that transition, and also about after the first record, do you feel now more settled in yourself?
Yeah, I think so. I think part of that, is kind of adjusting to life as an adult, my sort of late 20s, etc. I think, yeah, there's definitely a sense of like that being a period of development, like your 20s. So, yeah, I think all is kind of heading in the right direction. I think what you're maybe asking about, like vocally as well.
Generally,
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a sense of
I'm not only interested in your vocal cords, I'm interested in the person as
all
well.
of it. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Package.
Yeah, I think there's a sense also with like musically, like the directions that I'm going in feel like quite different to how they were sort of seven
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah.
And yeah, that I think links in with like my personal life and kind of my priorities and what I'm interested in, as well as like singing and how my voice is settling. So yeah, I think there's a definite progression, and it kind of feels a lot more stable. I think I feel a lot more stable than I did as like an early 20-year-old something. Yeah.
Last thing before we talk about the record, because you've mentioned something very interesting about like settling in adult life. Do you feel as if um you had to go through a second round of puberty?
Well, physically you do, yeah, when you take
Hmm.
hormones. And I think it's interesting. I've got to remind myself that I'm not 28 hormonally, even though I am
Yeah.
28. Hormonally, I'm like 21. My body's only been adjusting to hormones from that age. So yeah, it's quite interesting in a sense because I think if I then have like I don't know, if I'm upset by something or frustrated, I have to remember that like my body in a way is still a bit like a teenager's.
Mm.
And it's kind of reacting with that sort of level of understanding. Which yeah, is a pro and a con. I think yeah, there's a
Yeah.
good thing about staying in touch with like your inner child or whatever.
That
Um,
is definitely important. Yeah.
yeah, definitely.
You've mentioned your voice and your range and stuff like that. Mm, is it just my listening, or is your voice and also your vocal performance, is it now, I don't want to say lots, but definitely deeper than before, right?
Yeah. So there's no real research or studies that can give you like exact figures of like
Yeah.
what happens to a voice sort of on testosterone. But for myself, I think the first 5 years, I noticed like quite a gradual shift downward.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think there's still a degree of it sort of sitting lower and still sort of like coming down that little bit more.
Yeah.
I know my speaking voice today is a bit lower because we had Ash Inspire rehearsals yesterday, and I was doing a lot of
Oh.
screaming.
Yeah, we're still waiting for new music from,
It's on
don't
its
worry.
way. No, it will be.
Yeah. But so which vocal range are you now? You're definitely not a tenor. So what are you now? A baritone?
I don't know. So I sung in an opera last year, and I sung the
Mhm.
tenor role,
Okay.
which was still just kind of within range.
Okay.
But yeah, I think I've got some quite like juicy baritone notes sort of at the bottom of my register, which is really fun. Kind of exploring those, the way that they sort of resonate, feels like
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it especially comes through in the title track in Lux Aeterna, where I really had like, okay, that could be Vincent Price shortly before the grave, not from the grave, but shortly. Yeah, that was definitely interesting. Um, so also something that I think I noticed is a slightly different way of singing. Um, it sounds a little more, how should I say? It sounds as if you give your voice more space.
It's a really good way of
Intentional?
describing it. Yeah, no, I think so. Um, so I think when I was recording the first album, the Chemical Transit album that we had such a lovely chat about, I was mostly taking on sort of contemporary classical projects as a singer,
Mhm.
but also sort of navigating, that really volatile point in my transition when my voice was sort of so up and down
Yeah.
that I couldn't really have much control over what sounds sort of came out. But as I've sort of grown a bit more of that back and learned to work with my voice over the last few years, I've been able to like sing it in lots of different contexts,
Yeah.
and I think that's given me just kind of like more tools in my big toolbox of like vocal techniques and like
Mhm.
methods of singing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think very much do apply to Requiem as an album.
And so let's talk about space. Especially again, I think that one of the outstanding tracks on the record is the title track. And that could be your most sparsely instrumented song ever, right?
What, Lux Aeterna?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's pretty miserable, isn't it?
No, I was thinking about only the instrumentation, not just about the content, but the instrumentation. It's apart from the second half, but the first half, it was like, okay, that is very, very dark folk music.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think space is a really interesting one and sort of a through line for the album because a lot of it is very slow. It's not like fast, aggressive music in many places.
Yeah.
And I think there's something in like the economicness of the material. Like
Hmm.
you've listened to it. There's lots of motifs that kind of crop up across different songs and like
Yeah.
lots of bits of text that sort of are in the through line.
Yeah.
And I think for me anyway, when I'm using music and language in that way, there needs to be space for the performer to like tap into different emotional fields and
Hmm.
like draw on that feeling and then perform. But I think that translates to the listener as well. I think if someone's trying to
Yeah.
express something to you, I know I, as a listener, always want that
Hmm.
little bit more
It
space. So
definitely
I think
does.
that's right what I'm understanding.
Yeah, and it's the way that, with giving us this kind of songs, this kind of space, we also get enough time to, in a way, reflect on what you said, right? Which is a very, very important thing.
Yeah, I think so.
Um, and then some of the musical effects are even harder than before. When we, for example, listen to the title track, that is seemingly closer in a part, seemingly closer to the body than ever before. So, how much has harsh noise electronic music played into this one for you?
Yeah, I think substantially more than the first one. And I think in part that's due to Ash Inspire. We've been so fortunate to play so many like really interesting festivals and like
Yeah.
with other like really cool bands. And I think there's been a real sense of like joy in going to like watch other like really heavy artists play their
Yeah.
tunes and being like, okay, And yeah, so I think there's a lot more that I've been exposed to in terms of like what I like to listen to, and yeah, I
Yeah.
think a lot of that has made its way sort of back into the music that I'm making.
Mhm.
So yeah, you mentioned the body there, like absolutely cracking. A lot in the way of like Full of Hell as well, who we saw at Roadburn Festival a few years ago. I was listening to a lot of techno making it actually. I was listening to Paula Temple, if you've come across
Mhm.
her. Really incredible, yeah, really heavy beats in a lot of her work as
Mhm.
well, and like operant, quite a lot of King Woman. So yeah, I think that's sort of like the yeah, diversity of what I've been exposed to in terms of listening like has very much informed how I'm making my own music.
So then it's also, again, there are these clear different influences that you've just mentioned. But at the same time, there are clearly classical influences as well. For example, um, when you are talking about Requiem and also about the record in general, you very often talk about misa pro defunctis, which is just another way of just another name for Requiem. So, is it difficult for you to jump between those worlds, between the classical training that you had and the modern avant-garde?
No, I don't think it is difficult actually. I think weirdly they kind of go hand in hand. I think there's a lot in the way of like old liturgical music that
Mhm.
that kind of stuff that I grew
Mhm.
up with and like grew up
Mhm.
singing. That is just so permanently embedded in my brain that like I hear that in other contexts. I'll hear that in like more modern avant-garde music.
Mhm.
But I think the through line for music that I like that exists in sort of both of these spheres is like the heightened drama. It's like the
Mhm.
theatrical
Yeah.
element, like how obviously like when you go and see a performance that like might translate live, but like how that translates solely in the audio. Yeah, I do think there's a lot more overlap than I originally thought. And yeah, there's a sense of like that mix of like real beauty and like real heaviness and like how
Mhm.
those things feed each other and how they can kind of coexist.
Mhm.
And I think you do find that in kind of like quite a lot of old Anglican choral music as
Mhm.
well as in like really amazing modern stuff.
Mhm.
So yeah, there's almost like a symbiotic relationship I think between them.
Do you have a favorite Requiem?
Ooh, I mean Mozart's Requiem is cracking. The
Yeah, the
Dies
thing
Irae
that
for
the thing that he's dying on in the
that,
movie.
genuinely like
But it was
um,
also his last work, wasn't it?
definitely one of the last, if not the last. Yeah, I think later in his life for sure. Um, I really like Duruflé's Requiem. There's a beautiful version for like organ and voices, and then like a kind of symphonic one. Yeah, I think I sung the organ one quite a lot as a kid. And it's like very romantic music, like very beautiful, kind of long lyrical lines. Um, yeah, and again, they range for those like emotional extremes, which I think a lot of like heavy music does as well. It's that like fluttering between agony and ecstasy. So yeah,
Hmm.
I think there's a lot of an overlap, you know.
Um, at the same time, apart from all those avant-garde music of the 21st century that we've already mentioned, and also the classical and maybe neoclassical stuff, there is something very late 80s, early 90s noise rock kind of thing. For example, in Requiem, it has a bass line, or it has yeah, it is a bass line, which sounds straight out of a Swans record from the early 90s.
Yeah,
Who
Swans.
came up with that idea?
I mean, I think so. It was Scott McLean sort of as producer, and we had a lot of different conversations about like how I wanted it to sound and what I was listening to and what he was listening to. And he's in a way like quite holistic to work with in that regard. It's never just like
Mm-hmm.
straight into the work. It's like about understanding each other's approach.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he put on some Swans track like quite early in the development of it, and I was like, oh, like the sound of this, like the production of this is like really cool. So yeah, we kind of circled through a variety of sort of noise rock projects. Yeah, as we kind of were making it. So yeah, I'm really not surprised that like you're picking that up from it. I think there's a lot of like that kind of stuff happening.
Yeah, and it's interesting to hear how your voice works with, for lack of a better word, such muscular music, because I mean, like, it sounds very heavy and very in your face. Um, is that something that you also had to find your not only your influences and your songs, but also how you yourself fit into those?
Oh, that's a really interesting question.
Thank you.
I think on some tracks more than others.
Hmm.
Yeah. So sort of in the writing process, there was a mix of stuff that I'd like demoed from even like a few years before, just kind of
Hmm.
like had little sketchy
Yeah.
ideas. And then there was some stuff that I scored out sort of like with sheet music for
Hmm.
like an ensemble, and we ended up sort of playing it. And then some stuff that like evolved a bit more collaboratively in the room.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I think there's a degree of the stuff that was written with like the voice first, and the
Hmm.
kind of like the vocal line being like
Hmm.
the part of it. Often, yeah, that I didn't have to kind of go searching for the sound that I wanted. But when things had evolved that bit more in the room, there was suddenly like oh, actually, I need to think about what I'm doing a little bit more because maybe this has
Hmm.
evolved to a point that vocally, like I'm not occupying the same sort of timbral register or
Yeah.
like the right space. I think actually intro might have been one of the hardest ones to pinpoint for that because I think when I'd
Hmm.
originally sung it, it was kind of like quite a big classical, almost like a baritone sort of sound.
Hmm.
And after like we ended up slowing it down so much more than I'd originally written it. It's like it's miserably slow, and like in a really convincing way, but like it's brutal to listen to. And that suddenly meant that like anytime I couldn't affect the timbre of my voice in the same way
Hmm.
because like I needed to breathe so much more because of how much slower it was going.
Hmm.
So I couldn't do this kind of big sound. It sounded very at odds with like the rest of the world.
Hmm.
So yeah, we found some really interesting creative workarounds with like vocal harmonies in this, which I'm
Hmm.
really chuffed with, and kind of how Scott's mixed them and like panned them to give this sense of like a big voice, even if it's not like the production of the voice itself isn't that big.
Hmm.
So yeah, a real learning process in a lot of ways. Yeah, balancing that like muscular, actually, I love that word for it, with like the very non-muscular.
Yeah. So sometimes I had the feeling as if we have a very, very fragile part, and in a few seconds later, it's the whole song shifts into something much more muscular, much stronger. You've mentioned the intro and its name Introit, and I want to quickly talk about the track titles that you chose. You intentionally wrote a mass, didn't you?
Yeah, yeah, I did. Yeah. So yeah, the sort of the misa pro defunctis is just as you say, like it's another word for a requiem mass, but it normally
Yeah,
refers to like the big body of text that the
yeah,
mass is then like set to.
yeah.
So yeah, when I was sort of conceiving of it in those early stages, it was a matter of like reading through all of them because I've not done all
Mhm.
of them. I've just like cherry picked the ones that I liked. And yeah, figuring out which ones had text that either resonated with me that I could like automatically feel a response to, or
Mhm.
ones that were kind of like, oh, this could prompt like a more contemporary view of like
Mhm.
this very ancient sort of text. But yeah, all of them are from like a traditional mass, like a funeral mass.
Um, so I think we should also talk about the content of a record because it's obviously very important to the whole thing. Um, are you in a strange kind of way burying another part of the former you?
Ooh, there's definitely like a mourning in it, I
Mhm.
would say. I think what I'm picking up from your question is that you're maybe talking about this through like a gender angle, and I in a
No,
way,
I mean, like we both know that with your gender transfer, with your how should I say, with a transit, sorry, that was the word that I was looking for. With a transition, of course, there is also the necessity of finding a new, at least a part of a new personality, interior wise, but also towards the exterior world. So, is this a moment where you yourself say, okay, I now am so far along in the transition that I can say, okay, this part of my past is over and done with.
to be honest with you, I'm not sure I thought about it in that sense entirely. I think on the record, like the conditions of trans masculinity are discussed. Like I kind of can't shy away from that. That's kind of integral to it. And I think that's come from sort of my own time in the church as like a chorister, as like a young singer, and how formative in a variety of different ways that was, both kind of like personally and musically. But then the sort of the navigating of that very patriarchal power structure, and sort of how men are like very much centered in that, with then with transitioning, and that like, it's a very difficult one, because I think I'm now, you know, at a point in my life where people don't assume that I'm trans if I just meet them. People often assume that I'm gay, which, you know, is true, and that's fine. It's whatever. But I think there is a sense of a lot of cis men assume that I've had the same experiences of upbringing in a way that they've had. And that's not true. It's kind of like it's very conditional privilege, right? It's a bit like the front of a house that's made of cardboard. Like there's no substance behind it. And I think that's like a very interesting thing personally, but also like artistically to interrogate, because we all still live under this structure that like is patriarchal, and that structure affects men as well, even if they're not as aware of it, or it affects them differently, to how it affects women or queer people or trans people. So yeah, I think there's definitely a grappling with structure throughout the record. But yeah, I wouldn't say that it's specifically about my own grapple, or even about specific people. I think there's a lot in there that, whilst it's not wholly universally applicable, there are directions I think could apply to lots of different people, or like different structures, different organizations, different ways of thinking, which I hope will help people to sort of connect with it and resonate with it that bit more.
It's also interesting to look at some of the songs, because you also say so in one of your press texts. It's about the, as you've mentioned, patriarchal structure of church. Is it also a way that it's not just about this outer structure, but also about yourself? In one of the press kits, you talk about the problem of self-love and self-neglect. And then, of course, I have to ask, for example, the title track, Lux Aeterna, is maybe the only ever, or should one of the eternal loves be self-love, loving yourself?
I mean, I think so. Don't you? Like, probably.
Yeah.
No, it's an important thing to highlight, isn't it? That idea of like of structure, sort of internally, as well as the sort of external structures that we're talking about. And yeah, I think that was very poignant to my like thinking of and like reasoning to make it. And yeah, I think with Lux Aeterna, there is this idea of I don't know, I guess that idea of like forgiveness being like a really virtuous thing, and like understanding other people's pain and other people's trauma, and like the reasoning for their actions, like, is really important, and I do stand by that. But I think what I don't stand by is and therefore you should let people walk all over you for that. And I think on some level that is, or was pushed by some of the Christian structures that I grew up in, and I think that's my gripe with it.
Yeah, it's also a way that, of course, I still believe that you cannot really love any other person unless you also learn to love. You learn to love and live with yourself, which is something that all of us have to learn on a constant basis, right? When looking at it, how far should we, or how far is it still okay to neglect ourselves? I think in your case, of course, it's very different from my experience, of course. But would you say that, okay, we can, at a certain point, neglect ourselves for the sake of others, which is important? It's like the love we give for other people. But would you also agree that, caring for other people can only come from a point of vice versa-ness, that, you you care for others, and you also need others to care for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the exchange is important, isn't it? I think that that
Yeah.
sort of two-way dynamic is really key.
Yeah.
I think you're right that like in some friendships there can be a bit of an imbalance, and like
Yeah.
sometimes things can be weighted one way or the other. And I think so much of it is about your own personal boundaries, right, and your
Yeah.
understanding of yourself,
Yeah.
and sort of what you're willing personally to compromise on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that
Yeah.
only comes from knowing yourself and loving yourself in like a really deep and profound way. But yeah, that's much easier said than done, isn't it? And I think quite a lot of the record that I've made is about like navigating that and figuring out that
Yeah.
journey.
Yeah. 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 Totally. And very often, I think we just simply forget that we also have to take care of ourselves if we want to be good towards other people, right? Yeah, I definitely think that way. Um, did you ever have a feeling of oversharing, of giving out too much of yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think I worry about that with like all my work. I think if you're making work that like concerns itself with identity or like the socio-political climate, or like any kind of critique of anything, I think there are always people who are going to not understand what you're saying,
Mhm.
or they're kind of bringing their own perspective, or you end up even like accidentally revealing something, like what your subconscious kind of puts into your music, and then other people hear it and you don't hear it until afterwards. I think that can be a really scary thing.
It definitely can.
Yeah, but just kind of part of it, right? Like I think that's also kind of what makes the art the art. If I, had full control over absolutely everything that every other person heard, then there would be no scope for that kind of interpretation or that personal connection with
And here we come full circle again, then you wouldn't need the space in your songs.
it. That's true. I wouldn't. Yeah, they could be very condensed, like very short.
Mhm. One thing that I found highly interesting is that you, as a transgender male, now and only now feel the strength of speaking against patriarchal systematic oppression. Um, is it because your perspective has changed, or because you think, okay, now I am at a point where I can do that?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's the only time that I have spoken about this kind of like
Mhm.
artistically.
Mhm.
I think maybe like within the kind of all men unto me context, maybe a bit it's kind of more at the forefront.
Mhm.
But yeah, through my work, kind of doing contemporary classical music,
Mhm.
alternative folk music, the jazz punk stuff that I do, like I think there's quite a lot of through lines. Well, like yeah, that kind of has been made quite prominent.
Mhm.
And I think like there's a level of there's like a different weighting that often I'm speaking with, because I don't, as we know, we've talked about, have those experiences as a cis man. So like the perspective that I'm bringing is just not from that world.
Mhm.
Um, but I think there are some really wonderful people making music about this. There's like a lot of women making music about this. There's a lot of queer people, trans people, gender non-conforming people, and I really feel that strength is sort of in that community. So I talked a bit about the More the Moth record, and I think that deals with patriarchal power and like inherited trauma in a really
Yeah.
beautiful way. I think obviously Backwash does that in like a stunning way. And yeah, it's kind of, there's almost like a sense of long lineage that I'm
Mhm.
very privileged in a way to be a part
Yeah.
of.
Yeah. 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 Um, it is interesting to hear you talk so freely about it, and it's also interesting to see you. I still remember our talk 2 years ago. Um, if anybody would ask me, I would say like, okay, he has found himself more and more and more. Um, and I think it's also because I'm like, we both know you moved to Scotland a few years ago. You found a new circle of friends. This record, of course, is it's still all men unto me, but isn't that now more of a collective? Because like a lot of the Ash Inspire people are on there. You have Amaya on there. You have lots of other people involved. Um, so would you say that nowadays it's more of a collective effort?
I think so. Yeah. I think obviously the instrumentation for the first album and the second album are quite different, and there's still
Yeah,
some people sort of playing on both. So obviously
yeah,
Scott has been involved with both, and Simone is playing cello on both, and they're cracking. And yeah, some kind of people like Yosha in the way of design.
mhm,
Alistair did some of the original artwork, like Ash Inspire, all those connections and
yeah.
stuff. But even for like the live performances, we've got one this week, showcase tracks, and then one like the month after. And that live lineup has Simone and Scott, and then like three people who were not involved in the recording process at all.
Mhm,
So yeah, I think in a sense there is an idea of it being almost like a rotating lineup,
mhm,
and I think that also makes sense for like the future trajectory of it. Like I have no
mhm.
idea what the record after this is going to sound like.
Yeah.
Maybe it's going to be like really techno. I don't know. Maybe I'll like loop in. I don't know. It could go anywhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the idea of having like fixed band members doesn't necessarily serve like the artistic direction of it, but
Mhm.
it's so nice to have that network of like close collaborators and people that you know you can call on who are really good at what they do.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe it is more of a collective.
And then last question before we come to the infamous quickfire round. It is mentioned in the liner notes that a lot of not in the credits that a lot of the times we also hear organs on the record. You play most of the parts. Scott plays some part. Amaya plays some part. Um, is that nowadays your go-to instrument for composing?
I wish. I wish I had a big church organ in my house. Yeah, no, that'd be class. That'd be amazing. No, I think it was because when I started like writing these initial sketches for it, like in however many years ago it was, I was doing a residency in Cromarty, which is in the Scottish Highlands,
Mhm.
and I had access to like a digital church organ as well as a harmonium.
Mhm.
And there was this sense, obviously, of like being in a church space and thinking about like a requiem, and like how I would kind of start pulling notes and harmonies and stuff out of that. So I think because a lot of it was written at those instruments, they kind of had to make their way onto the record.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, like I am my sort of first like real instrument is keyboard. I'm sat here with my piano, and so I think that if I'm writing something, that is normally how I start.
Mhm.
I have had to learn the guitar to play some of the live bits,
Okay.
which has been fascinating, really interesting because I find it really hard, and like I'm getting a fair bit better at it. But
Okay.
yeah, I would be really interested to in the future write a piece sort of starting from guitar and like
Okay.
seeing how that informs like how I'm writing music.
Mhm.
'Cause, yeah, it was an absolute roast. I was like, wow, I'm really not good at this. So yeah, a lot of practice.
Yeah. I mean, like, it would be cool to see you do the whole rock star thing, wear a guitar and spandex and something like that. Yeah,
Yeah, that would
would.
be
Yeah, that would definitely be a transition. Image-wise, a transition definitely. Um, Rylan, we always go through the quickfire round at the end, and I want to give you some musical comparisons and connections. Let's start off with Swans. I'll give you two Swans record, and I hope you can choose between Greed and Filth.
Phil.
Mhm. I'll give you KO Dot.
Mm.
Shout out to my friend Toby Driver out there. Choirs of the Eve versus Habardo.
Choirs of Eve.
Hmm? I'll give you two bands that were and still are great. Unsane versus the Melvin.
Too hard. Couldn't choose.
If you had to choose, which one would you rather put on right now? Let's put it like that.
No, you've stumped me. I actually couldn't make a decision on that one. I have to pass. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I like being the mean guy. Um, I don't know where I've read it, but I've read it a few times. People comparing you and your openness to Scott Walker. So I'll give you Scott 1 versus Scott 4.
What, the albums?
Yeah.
Oh, four. Like his word later stuff is just, yeah, cracking.
Um, I'll give you two Radiohead records. Don't ask me why. Don't ask me why, but I'm interested in your choice between Amnesiac and Vabens.
Ooh, I think Amnesiac, actually.
And now the following is not about the people because both are awesome. Anna van Housewolf versus Matthew Barley's Greet. One on an organ and one on an harmonium.
Yeah, cracking. I think Anna von Housewolf. I think her approach to making her music is brilliant.
And as we have been talking about requiems and about, the last songs people wrote or for people, I'll give you, I think in both cases, it's more or less the last track they ever wrote. Bob Marley's Redemption Song versus Louis Armstrong's We've Got All the Time in the World.
I think Bob Marley's Redemption Song. Yeah, you can hear it, can't you? You can hear it in the tunes.
Yeah, I think I that would be the one where I would say no choice. I think the interesting bit about the Louis Armstrong song is that in both cases they knew they were dying. But I think the interesting thing about the Louis Armstrong song is telling your beloved, don't worry, we've got all the time in the world. Nothing's gonna, tear us apart. This is just for us. And I think it was a Bond song. I'm not sure about, but I think I've heard somewhere that it was on a Bond soundtrack. So that would be very, very hard for me to choose. It's good that here you can make a quick choice. I couldn't. Rylan, thanks for your time. Thanks for the interesting details and for the lovely chat. Everybody listen to Lux Aeterna. It will be out sometime around when you will be watching this. And take your time. And read the lyrics. I think there is a lot of stuff in there. Rylan, thanks for your time and enjoy the rest of your day, my friend.
Thank you so much. You as well. Thanks for having me.
Talk soon. Bye-bye.